Left in Kentucky, the podcast of Indivisible, Northern Kentucky. And welcome back to our weekly episode, almost weekly. I guess it's been 2 weeks this time. Our mostly sometimes weekly, but sometimes every other weekly podcast.
It's our intermittent podcast.
Our intermittent podcast. You're here with yours truly, Roberto Henriquez, and Amy Ferguson.
Amy Ferguson, that's me.
And Ann Dickerson.
Yes, the crazy one is here.
And we've got a really great episode lined up for you today. Our special guest here in a little bit is going to be Ryan Salzman, who is a political science professor at Northern Kentucky University. He's also a member of the Bellevue City Council, and he makes periodic appearances on local newscasts about with his political prognostications. So
we'll see what Ryan predicts.
Yeah,
dun,
we'll see.
dun, dun.
So get your notepads out so that you can take notes, because then you can keep score. It's like a baseball game, right? So we got to see what his batting average comes out to be. So anyway, but before we get to that, we have one of our favorite segments that everybody loves, the cow patties.
Ooh.
And there's just so, as always, there's so many choices.
I mean, it's spring. They're spreading the patties all around the field.
Yep, everything's coming up patties.
Yeah.
So I tell you,
good shrooms though.
yeah.
Well, really?
So Ann, why don't you kick us off this week?
All right. Well, I'm going to the top. I'm going all the way up to the biggest cow patty of them all, and that's, Baby Bunker Man, who turned off for the. I want to say it was the first time since the Civil War that all of the outside lights on the White House were turned off. I mean, it literally looked like an abandoned building.
Well, it has been.
And well, true that. But you could see the remnants of the fires that had been burning. So they shut all the lights off, and when the press took a long shot, you could see in the shadows and everything these just billows of smoke, and it was just. I mean, you go on Google Images right now and search for dystopia. That was the picture you saw. It was like life imitating art for real. But as somebody aptly pointed out, we've got over 100,000 dead from COVID. We've got over 40 million people out of work. We've got, still this pandemic. It's not like it's disappeared, even though according to some people you would never know it. We've got riots in the streets because we've got police brutality run amok. And let's just call it what it is. It's homicide by cop, run amok, and we have no leader. So, I don't know. I can't take it anymore. I don't know about you, but I'm so tired of it.
Maybe it was better he was in the bunker, because if he'd actually said something, it probably would have made everything worse.
Yeah, but while he's in the bunker, he has a phone call with mayors across the country, blaming them for what's going on, telling them that they needed to crack down, that they needed to be harder on protesters, that they needed to be arresting everybody, and that all of this was because of Antifa, a radical left-wing group. And there's so many cow patties embedded just in that that I've got a pasture all by myself with Baby Bunker Boy.
It's a giant cow patty the size of the White House, is what you're saying.
Hey, preach.
So basically you're saying that there was a overweight white male in his basement tweeting.
Just like he predicted in the debates in 2016.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So we have achieved his vision.
Yes.
Trumpsterdamus.
We found him. Yay.
Trumpsterdamus.
All
There's
right.
such a vacuum for leadership in this country right now, and it goes all the way up, and then you juxtapose that with there were pictures yesterday of Joe Biden out in the streets with protesters,
Yeah.
and he's crouched down, almost to his knees, just above the lip that makes the sidewalk, talking to people,
Yeah.
face to face, eye to eye. And there was this really just lovely interaction between him and three African American men, where each of the men, it was really cute, took turns taking selfies with him, and they would hand their phone off to each other. Here, get mine. Here, get mine.
Nice.
It wasn't that Biden was doing it; the people were doing it. We're so thirsty for leadership.
Oh, so much. So
Yeah.
much.
All right. Miss Amy.
Yes. My time. Well, I'm gonna go a little more local with my cow patty. And of course, last time I had a lot to say about Louisville Metro Police Department.
What?
Because of what happened to Breonna Taylor, because of the murder of Breonna Taylor.
Yep.
So now we're 2 weeks later, and none of those officers have been called to account. And so my cow patty goes to Mayor Fisher. He should have done this immediately. They should have been fired immediately, at least put on administrative leave immediately. They are still getting paychecks. They are still serving in the police department. I'm not sure if they're actually out on the streets. But there's no accountability, and I'm all about accountability. People need to stand up and take their licks for what they have done. And no amount of changing policy or changing rhetoric is going to,
Definitely.
speak to the justice that needs to be served for Breonna. So
And I
please,
think,
please, Mayor Fisher, do something. Fire your police chief.
and I think that's really the root of a lot of this, right? Is that we expect people to be held responsible and accountable for their actions, especially people that are in positions of power, like the police, like politicians. People that have more power are held to or should be held to a higher level of responsibility and accountability.
Yes.
Absolutely.
They shouldn't get a free pass as, oh, well, we're above reproach, we're above scrutiny.
Oh, and it goes back to what we, protested against in the past. No one is above the law. And
Right.
I don't care if you're talking about the President of the United States or,
Your grandma. Yeah, everybody
or
has to play.
whoever. We're all bound by the same rule of law. I don't
Right.
care what your job title is.
And that's why everybody's so frustrated, because they're
Yes.
seeing that that's not what's happening.
Yes.
Thank goodness for video technology, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
Because we would still be turning a blind eye.
Yep.
Because it's easier.
Well, definitely well-deserved cow patty there for Mayor Fisher. And,
Absolutely. And Amy, to your point, that goes back to a quote from Will Smith from quite a while ago. It's not that racism is on the rise, it's that it's getting filmed.
Yep.
Yep.
It's on camera.
So my cow patties. My cow patties are going to all of the hyper-militarized police departments throughout our country.
Yep.
And I want to be very clear, I'm not talking about all police departments, but it's very clear that there are certain police departments around the country. Some of them are in big cities, some of them are in small towns and small counties, but they have become over-militarized. And they give off this air of battle just by being present when they have military vehicles, military weapons, military style uniforms.
No military training, though.
But no military training. But you don't want the military on the streets.
No.
You want police officers, right? You want people who are trained to maintain the peace, which is what police officers should be doing, right? Maintaining the peace on our streets. And so yeah, my cow patty goes to those over-militarized police forces.
So it's funny that they have all the money to buy all this equipment, but they don't have the money to provide PPE for the ERs or even the first responders that are actual,
Well, a lot of the police departments get their money from seizures. They seize property from arrests, and then they sell that property. And lots of times we're talking like cars and boats and expensive property. And that goes straight into their coffers that they can then spend on whatever they want.
Agreed.
So
well-deserved patty.
Yep. So we have after our cow patties, we have our bullhorns.
Woo-hoo!
And our bullhorn this week is kind of the other side of that over-militarized police category. And so this week our bullhorn goes to those police departments that have shown true character and being a true part of their community and their society. We're talking about police departments like in Lexington, Kentucky, like in Houston, Coral Gables,
Atlanta,
Florida.
Georgia.
I'm sorry?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. Police departments that have really shown that they are there to help be part of the community and take care of protesters. And yeah, when it comes to rioters, they're there to hold the rioters accountable. But just like there are good police and there are bad police, there are protesters and there are rioters. Protesters are there protesting what they see as unfair treatment. Rioters are there to riot and cause trouble. So big bullhorn to those police departments that recognize there's a difference and are doing what they need to be doing as part of their communities. Part
of the solution instead of the problem.
Amen. They recognize that their people are hurting.
Absolutely. Right. All right, so that wraps it up for our cow patties and our bullhorns this week. Joining us now is Ryan Salzman, political science professor at Northern Kentucky University and also a city council member in Bellevue, Kentucky. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
Through the magic of technology, it's almost like we're in the same planet.
Yeah.
So Ryan is often tapped by different news sources to talk about politics in Kentucky and to what's going on, and politics in general, not just in Kentucky. But today we wanted to kind of talk about the upcoming Kentucky primary. There's a little Senate race that really isn't getting much national attention. So so why don't you start off, tell us a little bit about your take on how you see that developing?
Yeah, well, we'll know a lot more on in late June, right? Not to hedge too much, but in my social media feeds, Mr. Booker out of Louisville's very impressive, and I see a lot of positive momentum for him in the primary against Amy McGrath. It just seems that Amy's her recognition is going to be really hard to overcome, particularly given that we're operating in this pandemic world where you can't get out and have rallies. And so it's very, very hard to generate much momentum outside of whatever you see on social media. So I think Charles is doing a really good job. And of course, those aren't the only two in the race, but according to polling, you would think they're the only two in the race. So for all intents and purposes, I'll kind of limit it to those two. But it's hard to imagine Amy McGrath not being the candidate against Mitch McConnell. And then I would add to that, it's hard to imagine Mitch McConnell not winning this race going away.
What kind of polling have you seen that tells you that?
About Amy McGrath? Yeah, so when I look at polling this far out, in the head-to-head against Senator McConnell, when I see something that says 41 to 41, that to me personally, and I'll go on the record and say I have about a 40% success rate, I feel like, when it comes to predicting races. But when I see 41% against 41%, nobody wins a race with 41%. So the question then becomes what accounts for the other 18% until I don't start to take a poll seriously. Now, if there's a third candidate, to where somebody could win with a plurality like 41%, I would take it more serious, particularly if we're starting to get very close to the general election. But to look at 41%, I want to see 50. I want to see somebody touching 50% before I can say, okay, I think there's something to this. Now, if it was 50-50, I would say, well, I think Ms. McGrath is running a very, very strong chance of overtaking the majority leader. And certainly the numbers are good that she's tied it all. But again, 41 to 41, what does that really tell us? And that's the last I saw. There was another one that I believe had Ms. McGrath up 3 points, but it was inside the polling error. So anything inside the polling error, that's another thing I'll look at. It's a statistical tie. These
polls that you're talking about are just her, because I think a big one that was most recent that most people know about was that PPP poll. PPP, God, I hate that poll. That was a generic Democrat. I mean, it wasn't her specifically, because all of a sudden the three top Democratic candidates all started talking about that: Breuer, Booker, and McGrath. This was a good sign for their emails. All of a sudden, all three of them, their emails were saying the same thing. Their social media posts were saying the same thing. And so, that to me was really interesting, that it was just a generic Democrat and not one versus the other. And the other thing is, I didn't realize that any polling had been done among the Democratic candidates themselves, or that included anybody specifically.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any results there, but I heard reports that people had contacted to chime in on who they supported. So I didn't see the results.
I know what one you're talking about. Yeah. I know what one you're talking about. They didn't include Breuer.
Right. They didn't include him at all.
They basically left him out, which says a lot to me. But they specifically left him out so that, then the claim can be kind of like what you were saying. They can say, oh, well, he didn't register. Well, of course not, because he wasn't.
He wasn't one of the choices.
Yeah. Right? I think that all three choices were actually.
If I'm not mistaken, that was done by the Booker campaign.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense that they would, because, for a number of reasons. One, he wants to be the challenger to Ms. McGrath. So that helps him kind of take that position. But also, if you start dividing it up, if she's polling, not runaway, it may look more runaway if you add a third or fourth candidate in there. So I didn't see the results of that, but I heard reports that of a couple people saying they got contacted, I think by phone, and that.
Yeah, Robert Coney, who we had on from my old Kentucky podcast, he got called.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really funny, because he was out on Twitter saying that they only asked him about two. They didn't ask him about anybody else.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
There's no doubt that this is really a crapshoot the June primary, because it's, the nature of how the vote is going to happen. What are the turnout numbers going to look like? How will those be distributed per party? How will those be distributed per congressional district?
Right.
These are just things like you almost can't even guess. Of course, I'm always going to be asked to guess, so then I can be wrong. That's how you end up. I'm about like a baseball player who's kind of decent for a lot of these things. I'll try to bat.
You bat 300. I was going to say, getting about 340.
Yeah, that would be great. If I could be that successful, and I'll take it. It's hard to predict human behavior. It's hard. The good news is we don't have to worry about the weather. For an election, particularly in a place like Kentucky during the general, early November is kind of a tricky time for the weather, and that can make a huge difference. Let's think about the last governor's race. What happens if there's a freak snowstorm, in Western Kentucky? That 5,000 votes might be very different. Of course, he may have won by 20,000 votes. It's hard to say. But I don't think, to kind of go back to the general for this coming year, I mean, all I can really do is read the demographics that I see. I'm not originally from Kentucky. I've lived there for 8 years. I've lived in Kentucky long enough to know that to a lot of Kentuckians, I'm not a real Kentuckian, because I can see the hills of the Ohio from my kitchen window, and I only live about a block away from the Ohio River. So I don't want to pretend that I know the entire state. But what I can tell you in my experiences and my observations to this point, a lot of it's really drawn from my students who do come from all over the state, is that, it's a very conservative state. And that, party aside, it's a more conservative state. It was that way in the state of Texas as well, where, Democrats tended to be a bit more moderate. And when it comes down to voting in November, it's just going to be really hard. When I look at, Mr. Booker, really any of the candidates, I don't think that they are a better candidate on their face anyway than Allison Grimes was in 2014.
Really?
I don't see that they have a better machinery, a better recognition. None of them have won a statewide race in Kentucky. I mean, Allison Grimes had won a statewide race in Kentucky. She had those. So you kind of tick, what are the things that you have in your camp? And she lost by 12, 15%, which historically is going to end up looking like a pretty close race against Senator McConnell. Now, there's a lot of things left to change. But, I would think any Democrat losing by less than 10 points to Senator McConnell it would be a reason to high five. And I know that this probably isn't proud to say that, but if you do
we're in
get
2020, we're in
right.
2020, and we can just throw everything that we know out the window, I think.
So far, I don't even want to guess what September is going to be like, much less November. And a lot of things really could change, but he is an impressive, that is, Senator McConnell is an impressive politician.
He's got a machine.
Of the world. He is the machine.
He's
a machine.
State.
He has a machine. There is no misstep. I'm sure that we've all had the opportunity to see him speak live. Very impressive. His ability to neither look ecstatic nor upset. I was in the room in Covington at the Chamber of Commerce event when he spoke. This would have been probably early 2017, and there was protesters in the room.
Yeah, we were outside.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, were you outside? Oh, I remember saying hi to people outside and then walking in and having lunch. It was kind of an odd feeling. But it's impressive, his ability to kind of stay calm under fire and under duress. So if the campaign is getting close, you're not going to see any flinching on the senator's part. But to your point, I think that there's always a chance that something could go really sideways. But how would the voters potentially look at Senator McConnell and say they're worse off having him, whatever's going sideways, in the driver's seat of the United States Senate? I thought it was a very powerful pitch that he gave back in 2014 about, maintaining the majority and him as majority leader. So it's just hard. I've been around Kentucky long enough just to see, I don't see anything in the playing field right now that makes me think that he's really in danger. But that could change.
Right. What do you think about, and sorry guys, I just, as he talks, I have like 10 things go ding, ding, ding.
Yep.
Um, so here's my question to you. Right now, as we look at things, whether you're a politician or not, it seems like the number one issues that pop for everyone, and regardless of party, are healthcare, jobs, and the economy, right? Right now, none of those things is going his way. None. He can try to bullshit a bullshitter, but I for lack of a better term, but I think most people now are that frustrated. And one thing that I personally noticed because I worked on the statewide coordinated campaign. So, I mean, I was canvassing in places like Triple Crown in Boone County and Villa Hill, some of these wealthier neighborhoods that are always going to lean more towards the conservative Republican side. And I honestly can't tell you how many people I talked to face that were like, yeah, McConnell's been around a long time. It's time for him to go. And I would turn him inside. I'm like, yay. But I would turn and let my jaw hit the floor and go, did I really just hear what I heard? And as many times as we've heard that sentiment over the past 36 years, though, it's never bared out in the vote, kind of like you're saying. But there's so many things, back to what you said, up in the air right now. You've got the confusion over voting, which I just found out, and I meant to tell Amy and Roberto this, and I forgot. I just found out 2 days ago that my mom does not know how to vote. My mom and my stepdad.
Wow.
And they live in Boone County. They're counting on everyone to be engaged like we are now via technology. And you have the most reliable set of voters who are the least connected to technology. So I personally think that turnout is going to be very suppressed, and it's going to hit in ways that nobody thinks about, because the people that are engaged on social media and via technology are millennials and Gen Xers. And those people trend to the left. Except for then you throw in that weird Kentucky monkey wrench, which is that we are one of 4 states in the entire country where people 18 to 25 trend Republican. Mm-hmm. So when you add all of that together, does that give you pause anywhere? Does that change your thought process anywhere?
Well, I mean, it's definitely clear as mud, right? But I agree with you. I haven't seen the stat about the younger people trending more conservative and more Republican, but that's certainly what I see in my classroom every day. And that's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And even coming from Texas, where I was teaching before, it wasn't quite, it's still skewed left. And that could have been the nature of the institution, who knows, but yeah, that definitely makes it harder to predict. We can't look, to your point, I think, to other states and say, okay, well, what are their technological tendencies here? I mean, I'm thrilled for the Commonwealth that we have this primary happening first. I'm thrilled because this is a great practice run. It's also compelling the individuals who maybe for party reasons or kind of for red meat reasons would oppose this style of voting. It's compelling to do it. Specifically, I'm thinking of Secretary of State Adams, that he's having to support this mail-in ballot system. So I think that it puts us in a better position moving towards November and practice, so getting better at it. And even if we miss it, as disappointing is not the right word, but let's just go with it. I'm a parent, so I say disappointed a lot. So, as it is, with that, it does give us a chance to get better.
We're all parents here.
Yes,
we all feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my hope is that while it could be really bad in the June primary, it could be much better than most if we're thinking across states November. And then and when I say better, I'm imagining in my head that starts to kind of move towards the average. That is, our turnout kind of looks more similar, and the like. But going back to your question, or what you said about what policies people are interested in right now and how those are not what's generally aligning, I'm always reminded of what we say are, the three most important things that people use to make their decisions when they're voting, when they're in the voting booth. Number one is party. Really, like number 1, 2, 3, and so a million is party. Number two, unfortunately. Number two are personality traits. And that could actually ding the majority leader quite a bit. It could really hurt Senator McConnell, because just like I said, even though he's not hated because of his disposition, he's also not very well liked because of his disposition. So that could really hurt him. That's where I look to somebody like Mr. Booker and get really excited, because I think that there's a really strong contrast there. And there's certainly a physical contrast with Ms. McGrath, but she's not, I don't find her to be, as riveting when she speaks. There's that rhetorical contrast isn't there. There's certainly a physical, but also Mr. Booker's, he's an African-American, he's a black man. And so there's going to also be a very strong physical contrast. He's younger. He's going to make Senator McConnell look very old if they're standing next to each other. And so, but the personality could hurt. Way down the list, it is policy positions. And in fact, when the earliest iterations of research around why people choose who they choose when they're in the ballot booth, policy issues actually really didn't register until a few iterations of the scholarship had been complete. And that they don't pay attention. Yeah, it's so frustrating.
But we can even, because that's my number one. It's like, that's what I go to. The person who has the most concrete, most well laid out plans, which is what drew me so much to Elizabeth Warren in the presidential. I'm like, this lady is smart. I loved her tagline, I've got a policy for that. Mm-hmm. Plus the personality on top of that. But I mean, when you actually went to read her plans, it's like, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to pay for it. This is what we need to do. And I'm like, yes.
Because you're a nerd.
I am a nerd. And when I hear like what you're saying, it just breaks my heart. But, I have a friend out in Grant County who just cracked me up the other day because her saying is that Kentucky is all about God's guns and gametes. And I was like, holy crap.
Wow, you're getting the hardcore science now.
Yeah,
GG.
I had never heard it put that way before, and I just lost it because I'm like, oh, you're killing me. You're breaking my heart.
And so, to be clear, there's that party affiliation. There's a lot of policy embedded in that. But I think that, we just say party affiliation because it is that superficial for most people. I wear a red hat, you wear a blue hat, we're on the same team, we're not on the same team. But you can look at the gubernatorial election. My feeling is Andy Bashir was not elected because he was a Democrat. He was not elected because he has good policies. He was elected because he wasn't Matt Bevin. That was his best character, was that he wasn't Matt Bevin. And we can look to the undercard races to really kind of verify that. I mean, when Allison wins by 300,000 votes, there's this, it's pretty clear, they usually don't flip like that on their head. And so, it'll be really interesting for me to see what happens. Low turnout really could benefit the other two candidates besides Miss McGrath. And there could be a lot of people who aren't even aware of the other candidates who essentially say, I don't have any other competitive, I'm a Democrat and I'm not, I don't have any reason to vote in the primary except for this one, but McGrath's going to run away with it. So why even bother? And that again, kind of further depresses, turnout on that. I think about that a lot locally. In fact, I was talking about, I said, outside of the Senate, we don't even have any competitive race in our area. And we ticked through all of them, and it took us a while to remember that there is a competitive Democratic primary in the 4th congressional district even. But this is a lot because they're not getting out. There's no rallies. There's really, really very little door knocking for all the obvious health reasons.
And I think there's going to be a lot of sticker shock for people too, because they're going to get their ballot and they're going to see 10 people listed under the Democrats running for Senate. And people are going to go, what? Because
they're going to call us is what they're going to do.
Well, I mean, it's just so funny to me because even people, I people who go, think that they're well-informed, smart Democrat, and then you realize there's 10 people in this race, and they're all like, what?
Yep.
Chances are they have their horse already.
Yeah.
And I think that if Ms. McGrath was a stronger candidate, this would have been over a while ago. And this is something that has frustrated me personally as somebody who holds, office, albeit at a very, very localized level, which I appreciate every single day. But that, it's frustrating to see people who aren't necessarily being successful in their political careers, aspirations, efforts, and then they decide to up it. It's like, well, I couldn't hack it at T-ball, so I guess that I'll just go try out for the varsity baseball team. And here in Texas, it's that way. I say here in Texas, that you have Beto. Beto doesn't win against Ted Cruz, and so what does he decide to do? Run for president? You're like, why does that make sense?
Oh my gosh!
Why isn't she running? Why isn't Amy McGrath running again against Barr? Why? Why is that happening? I don't understand. You ran such a good race. Like, why aren't you Beto? Why aren't you running against John Cornyn for Senate? Why aren't you doing that? And we have people in Texas that are saying, like, if he would just run for Senate, he was so close. And I think that we could get over that hill. And I say the same thing about Miss McGrath. You ran such a good campaign. Now, it's really hard when people are in your ear saying, you got to do it. You got to do it. You can unseat him. You can unseat him. We'll see. I mean,
here's my other concerns with, with that whole campaign. And, I do want to make one point very, very clear, and it's something that you kind of brought up, which frustrates me too, is you said the second thing that people look at is personality. That to me is as surface as party. Oh, yeah. I don't care what your personality is. I mean, it's a factor that might get me excited, but your personality doesn't determine what kind of legislator you're going to be.
Yeah, and really, I should have said it's personal characteristics, which is mostly personality, but personal characteristics are also gender, race, these things that are not personality, but personal characteristics. So Hillary Clinton, I just don't trust her. Like that's a personal characteristic that has nothing to do with anything except how you feel about that. But John Edwards, he's just a good family guy. Well, that one didn't age very well, but by golly, everybody was saying that back in 2004 or whatever. They just loved him some John Edwards. He was just the best family guy. But really, what he was is he was pretty. He's a pretty man. And he had a pretty family, and so we elevate these things. But it's also the same thing that people couldn't get past with Matt Bevin. And the question becomes, if we think about the presidential race, if we move past party and go to personal characteristics, Donald Trump is not going to be reelected if that's where we sit, is on personal characteristics. Now, party will make sure it's a close race, but there are too many people kind of your canvassing experience, talking about Senator McConnell, there are too many people that they won't hold their nose and vote for him again. Why? It's personal characteristics. They don't like what he tweets. It has nothing to do with the laws that have been passed under him. It has nothing to do that they're for or against withdrawing from the WHO. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with they just don't like him. And all these things certainly contribute to each other. I mean, you really can't separate them all. But that's what it's going to be. And that's what the history books, when they're written, whether he is reelected or not, they're going to talk about his style as being the reason for it. If he is reelected, we're going to give credit to him being a populist and being somebody who was able to make base appeals to people's, what they're truly feeling. And it's really, but again, it's feeling. It's not about that. And that's okay. That's democracy in some ways should work like this, right? I like to think about this idea that, it's this self-interest rightly understood. If we all vote for our self-interest, then it comes out in the wash. And it, at the aggregate, it works. And so you can't presume, and in many ways, this is what liberals get really tagged with. Like, don't tell me what to think. Stop telling me what to feel. You just take care of yourself. I'll just take care of myself. But this is, if we can all just pursuing the interests of somebody with a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old who's upper middle class and highly educated and a transplant from my home, and with a wife who's way outkicked my coverage on elected official, and so I need things. Who would have ever thought that somebody like myself would be worried about road aid funding? I'm so worried about the gas tax because we got roads slipping off the side of our hills in Bellevue.
Literally.
Literally slipping off the side. I talked to a man the other day whose backyard has moved 3 feet in the last week since all the rain.
Oh my gosh.
So this is where it's like, well, Ryan Salzman should be voting on these issues, but I shouldn't expect you to vote on those issues. But if we all kind of pursue these things, and I know it's really, really hard, and I have the benefit of going and talking to idealistic, positive 18 and 20-year-olds, and they are my coping mechanism. Like, make no mistake, they are my coping mechanism to work through a lot of this. But that's, the system is working how it should work.
That's funny.
Generally, it's working how it should work. The presidency is probably a different case, but in general, I think it's working how it should work. So keep grinding away. I'm thrilled to hear when you say you've been canvassing, and that's as long as you kind of put the rubber to the road.
Let me tell you, I'm ready. I want to go out and canvass right now so bad I can't see straight. I have promised I have vowed in the McConnell race to personally contact 10,000 people, even if I have to go out in a hazmat suit in 100-degree weather.
You won't survive that.
Yeah, these two can testify to the fact, and Amy will know that means that I will be visiting her porch.
Yes.
Because
that's her recuperation station.
Right. They can testify to, the number of days that I was out in that kind of weather last year and thought I was going to die. But I have to tell our audience who can't see, they can only hear us. You have the best facial expressions on the planet. So when people hear me crack up, please know that it's his words combined with his facial expressions.
It's when he puts that clown nose on. You just can't resist. All his little props.
I saw the best sign that I have seen ever last night, and it really, really struck me. And I'm like, I want to tattoo this on everyone's foreheads. I really do. It said, vote in the best interests of the most vulnerable person you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes. A man had created some kind of Twitter post where he was holding up this sign that he had made, and God, did that speak to me on such a personal level. And I was like, yes, if everybody thought that way. But we don't. We're selfish. Human beings are some of the most selfish, greedy things on the planet. We've proven that time and time again. But it really did strike home with me. I personally, I like surprises. I'm hoping for a surprise. I would love to see a little bit of the Rachel Bitcoffer sentiment strike Kentucky in some unpredictable ways. I get frustrated because, and I go back and forth, I have this internal struggle like you would not believe. People who say, well, it's got to be Amy McGrath because she is a moderate Democrat. She speaks to that part of Kentucky, that seems to be in line with the constituents across the state, blah, blah, blah. She's got this name recognition, but something like 97% of her money comes from outside of the state, which scares the living you-know-what out of me. Because what that tells me is that it's not the Kentucky people that are behind her, and money doesn't vote. On the other hand, it does allow those California, New York, Chicago, Florida people who are donating a boatload of money to her to have a voice in our process, because it allows her to have the name recognition that you were talking about. So, and then you brought up Allison Grimes. My biggest fear is this turning into a 2.0. That's my greatest fear.
Yeah.
That so many missteps have been made already that there's no coming back from it for her.
There's an interesting opportunity here for Mr. Booker with the protests that are going on. Honestly, if we had recorded this 4 days ago, I've started to feel very different. He's getting a lot of traction, and I do think that my predictions for November are definitely it's a McGrath versus McConnell situation, but I think Booker turns this thing potentially on its head. So there's much more of a chance of there being a surprise with him, and it does seem like the issue saliency is shifting with this. These Roberto and I were talking earlier about the fact that these protests seem different than we've had in the last 10 years, let's say. I'm not old enough to remember much beyond that. I'm a young, very young individual.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ryan.
Yeah.
It'll be the last time you're ever on this show.
Right? As I'm sitting here thinking I'm old enough to be your mother, shut it down.
I feel very young.
I didn't have a lot of that, but there's a strong pivot happening right now, and this is really good timing for his campaign. I'm certain that if asked, he would say, I would rather this not be good for me. I would rather it not happen or have to happen, but the dialogue is going to go on for the protests aside. Race is going to be, and race relations and criminal justice reform and, big city criminal justice reform and police reform are going to be front and center probably from now until the end of June. And so this is a real opportunity for him. It also puts Ms. McGrath in a very difficult position because there's, especially on the Democratic side, this desire to kind of, I don't want to say prop up your opponent, but certainly give recognition where it's due and to try as much as possible not to, not to mansplain to anybody why it should happen. And so she may be in a kind of awkward moment where she feels like she can't push back as he's getting momentum, that this isn't an appropriate time for her, because I think we all agree that all the candidates think there's a lot bigger issues in play here than strictly their campaign. Now, I think if they were incumbents, that might be different, but nonetheless, none of them are incumbents, and they wouldn't ever fess up to it, even if it wasn't true. But she's going to be in when can she kind of take the gloves off and really get into the mud and start fighting? That timeline has changed, and so this is a real opening for him to be able to, I don't want to say become kind of the leader of the pack, but at least start to make up some serious ground kind of in a heartbeat. It's when you're watching the Derby and you realize that horse they have been holding that horse back. For a minute, you thought through the second turn, I think that they're just getting beat. But then as you approach that third turn, it's like, oh no, they were holding him back. Okay. And these are contextual realities, but he's got a lot of tailwind potentially. Now he could misstep. There's a lot of opportunity here for him in his campaign, and opportunities sometimes fall flat on their face. See, unfortunately, the McGrath campaign during the Kavanaugh stuff and when she was rolling out, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
you messed up.
That was
oh my God.
Talk about stumbling out of the gate.
Oh my gosh. So he could do that, right? I mean, we could have this conversation again in 3 weeks right before the primary, and we say, yeah, so about that opportunity.
Well, what do you think about the debate tomorrow?
Well, I bet it's going to be a lot about race relations from the get-go. That's just a guess, but how could you not? What person who's moderating the debate is going to bury that question? somewhere. So I bet that's going to be front and center. So the question then is how quickly do they move on from that to other issues, and do those other issues put anybody else in a better position? So, okay, now we shift to pandemic discussion. Now we shift to COVID discussion. Well, guess what? African Americans, Latinos are being impacted at a much higher rate. Yep. So you get to stay right on race, right? You get to stay right on race. And if I'm in his ear, I'm like, you got to keep it on that. You got to keep it on that. If I'm in Amy McGrath's ear, I'm like, you got to somehow move off of this discussion, not because you're not well positioned and you wouldn't be better at this than Senator McConnell, but this isn't about that. She has to somehow talk about how much money she's raised. And that's kind of gauche, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, like our group has endorsed Mike Breuer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is awkward.
No.
Not at all.
Okay. That's okay, because you give me a perfect shot. So how does he, because, he actually announced 1 week after Amy McGrath.
Yeah, I knew it was quick.
And to be truthful, I mean, one of the questions, something that's been just eating at me, although, well, I'm not going down that road.
Family show.
It was clear when Mike came out, when he first announced, like the first thing that caught me was his announcement video, right? And I'm like, this is really impressive. It was provocative. It was a slap you in the face, make you stop and think. And I'm like, this is what I want. As a Democrat, as a concerned citizen and voter, this is what I want. And then he came out with the one after that was like, oh. And the line that I heard from a lot of people at that time was that he's the kind of candidate that people wish Amy McGrath was. Mm-hmm. Because they're both retired Marine lieutenant colonels. So they have the exact same rank. A little bit different experience because, of course, she was a co-pilot, a fighter pilot, whereas he led troops on the ground. But still got that military background, which is always a plus for a Democrat because they tend to lean Republican. So anything we can get to make them at least stop and look at our guy, woohoo! We'll take it. But he very clearly from the jump took the progressive lane. Mm-hmm. And she very clearly from the jump took the middle of the road lane, the more conservative Democrat lane. Then you didn't really hear anything from anybody for a while until Booker in the fall announced his listening tour, his exploratory committee. So, and then he announced that, he was going to go ahead and run. And he and Breuer are almost exactly the same on the issues. Why? What's the impetus to get into the race when you had somebody who was already talking about all the exact same things? Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is what you were just talking about. People are tired of seeing all white candidates run all the time, and especially white men. Mm-hmm. I can't lump Mike into the older category only because he's in my generation. He's not in McConnell's generation. So I refuse to call him an old white man. but he is a white man. So I'm wondering, somehow if that isn't part of it as well, that we need to put some flavors, some color in here. We need to get a perspective that's different in some way, even though they were the same on policy. But like you said, if policy goes so far down on the list that it's not what people are paying attention to, is this the thing that maybe gives him the attention that's needed? I don't know. I'm like,
and I do think he has. Yeah, Mike has this is his opportunity. The debate that is, because when you look at him, what you don't expect to come out of his mouth is universal basic income.
Right.
Especially when I'm sure when he introduces himself, he's going to talk about he's a farmer. That these are things that are fundamental to him, and then he's going to go to universal basic income. Now, we all are at least kind of familiar with how the farming industry works, and clearly they receive huge bailouts. So maybe this shouldn't be that surprising, even though it kind of gets held up as a flag in a different way. typically, but he might be able to really squeeze himself in, but he also it would go the opposite, where he doesn't even have an opportunity to say anything to really distinguish himself. I haven't had the pleasure of seeing any three of them speak live.
Oh, you're kidding! You didn't see?
Shame on you.
Oh,
Not watching our debate or our forum.
Oh, that's it, Roberto. Take him off the list permanent.
I've seen clips of them, but I should say, like, I haven't seen them like in kind of an extended where you're able to, we all see good clips of people, and clips can be, pretty long.
We had them for 2 hours standing side by side answering the same questions already, Ryan. Now, tisk.
I know. Well, bad news for everybody. I'm a registered independent, so I don't get to vote.
Funny.
I know you're like, he's definitely out now. He's gone.
No.
No, we like independence.
What's funny is you can't, and this has been, man, you've hit on all my crises of faith issues that have come up over these past couple of weeks. So it's really funny.
I doubt that I helped. My wife usually tells people who want to talk to me that she says, you don't want to talk to him about politics. You're not going to come away feeling any better about whatever it is that you want if you talk to him.
It's not that it's better. It just gives you a point to think about. And as Amy has called me a nerd, I embrace my inner nerd. I myself had thought about, leaving the Democratic Party and going independent. And given my generation, the Gen Xers have been the ones for the past 2 years to come out in massive numbers. I'm the last person that they want to do that. Mm. But I'm tired of party affiliation being the number one thing that people think about. As much as my heart and my soul and everything I think about leans that way, and probably leans farther left than most people would believe, because I really do try to straddle that fence between conservative Democrat and progressive Democrat. I want the person to come first. I want their ideas to come first. I want all the things that matter to come first, because at the end of the day, I feel like it can't be about the Democratic policy is better for you or the Republican policy is better for you. It needs to be about this policy works for the most people for the best reasons. And so I kind of feel like the only way to do that is for that whole party affiliation to just disappear. Or I would give my right arm to have a parliamentary system where we had like 5 parties.
Yeah.
I can't go register as a Labor Party person or a Progressive Party person. And I think we need more of that, because I think maybe part of the problem in being this big tent party of Democrats is that too many people can't get enough of their message heard. And the same I would say is true on the Republican side, because we have seen at least one that I follow intently, William Woods, a Kentucky Republican who was ran in the primary for the governorship. He is a lot of times he is more of a liberal on social issues, very conservative on the financial side of things. And he's not all the way there. Like, I would never expect him to switch to become a Democrat. But he has been speaking out a lot about these race relations issues and issues related to the LGBT community and things of that nature. And I'm like, there have got to be a lot of people out there like him who fall into a more conservative than the Democratic side of politics, but not so, batshit crazy all the way to the right that it's the guns, gods, and gametes only. There's just so many factions, and I wonder if we wouldn't have a better debate, a better discussion across our politics across the country if there weren't more divisions.
Well, in Kentucky is particularly bad. I've Never thought about it until I moved to the Commonwealth, but it's some of the most restrictive, closed voting laws that I mean, no early voting, no absentee voting unless you swear on threat of penalty that you're going to be out of the county
Right.
on that day. And that's not even to start talking about the primary system where you have to pre-register. So back in my home state, it was considered a closed primary, but you registered when you voted in the primary. That was your registration. So you could be standing in line to vote Democrat, and you could say, well, the Republican line's shorter, so I'm going to go get in the Republican line. And that was fine. And the only reason that they had it where you registered is in case there was a runoff. You couldn't come back and vote. I voted Democrat and there's a runoff in the Republican primary, so I'm going to come back and vote in the Republican. So that's really the only reason that they do it. But it's so restrictive. But to be clear, parties want to maintain the power that they have. So these laws are all in place for a reason. I mean, it's meant to exclude people. That's why they do it. And political parties, like any large institution, I'm like a papaw millennial. Like I'm as old as you can be and still be a millennial. I feel it every day in that I really don't like institutions. Institutions really bother me. And that could be a higher ed institution. That could be a governmental institution. It could be, I love organized labor, but I have a hard time with unions. These are separable to me, but parties are big institutions as well. And they want to control things just as much. There are people who work for the Democratic Party all up and down. And I know a lot of them, and I know a lot of them that work for the Republican Party, not for candidates, not for elected officials, but for the party. Yeah. And they have a very self-interested reason to try to maintain those things.
We know.
I feel that.
But you're onto something, Ann, with this idea of like the differences and where we all stand. And the reality with I talk early on with my students about every single policy and even sub-policies within policies exist along ideological spectrums. And where we place ourselves on those ideological spectrums varies. And so on infrastructure policy, I'm on one side, and on something else, I'm on another. But even for infrastructure, I'm more liberal when it comes to pedestrian and bike infrastructure, and maybe I'm more conservative when it comes to our waterways. And if you were to list out all of these spectrum, hundreds of them, thousands of them for each individual policy, and plot where you were on each of those individual things, it starts to look like a DNA matrix.
Yeah.
And what we know is that everybody's DNA is unique. That's what we know. And the reality is the same for political stuff. Yeah. So, we should be unique. And I agree with you that it's frustrating that there's not an ability for those things to be more responsive to who we are as individuals. So we just have to do the best we can.
Yeah, I hear you.
Well, great conversation today. Definitely been good having you on. Wish we could keep going and going, but
me too, Brian. We have to sit down and have a drink sometime when we're allowed out again.
Oh, please, let's make that happen.
Come on out to the farm.
I'll go out.
There's a couple of nice places in Bellevue we can get together.
Absolutely. I think we can all go hang out in Wanda's front yard or something.
There you go.
Okay.
Sounds good.
But thank you for having me. This was really great.
Yeah,
you got to come back and talk to us again after.
After the primary, we'll have you come back, and
that'd be fun.
We'll go over your scorecard and see if you got that 340.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Mitch McConnell's going to win his primary, and that a Democrat is going to win the Democratic primary.
Okay,
saying that.
You heard it here first. A Democrat will win the Democratic primary.
Hey, Roberto, 1 second, because we got so engrossed, as we always do. We did not talk about the congressional race at all.
Oh, yeah.
So, do you have a prediction there or no?
I have no idea on the Democratic side. You're talking about in the fourth and Kentucky 4. I have no idea on the Democratic side who will pull out. I would, think that I'd see that both of them could have. They're from such different areas of northern Kentucky, and I have no idea really what their followings are. This is it being the pandemic has really thrown water on that. So I'd say that's almost a coin flip. Who's first on the ballot? That's who I'll go with. Whoever's listed first is who I'm picking. to win that one.
Well, I think Alexandra has more of a showing just because she's in the medical field
Yes.
during this pandemic, and that just sort of, those are our heroes, and
Yes.
so she could sort of
Absolutely.
ride that a little bit, I think.
I think you're right. So that's helpful, but again, it's probably a toss-up, and it'll probably be very close. But then on the Republican side, I thought McMurtry was going to give Massey a real challenge, and it's been almost laughable.
I see a lot of his signs in my neighborhood.
Okay, I haven't seen anything inside of 275. Really.
Well,
I haven't either. And you know what's really funny is I saw Republican polling. The last lead I saw was Massey, 72%, McMurtry, 28%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ouch.
This is back there's somebody in McMurtry's ear, around the time of the Cov-Cath, those legal rulings, and he was the attorney, and there's somebody in his ear. But those conversations, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on in Northern Kentucky, there's been conversations since shortly after Thomas Massey was elected about who's going to oust Thomas Massey. And a lot of that has drifted towards the Republican side. And really been striking how...
Well, he's already picked his replacement. You know that, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Yeah, he's grooming Savannah Maddox to take his place.
Yeah. Right.
Hey.
And you thought it couldn't get worse.
Yeah, but that does make sense. I was thinking about her more just because I see her down at the Capitol on the statewide. But yeah,
right. But
that's a treat.
If she hasn't just damaged herself fundamentally over the last week or so.
No, they're eating her up. They are eating her up because, Northern Kentucky has the highest number of libertarians in the state. The Congressional District 4 has more libertarians than any other part of the state. And they've kind of banded together with these Tea Party people to take on the traditional Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see then if and when that time comes. And I certainly thought that if he was Thomas Massey had a tough primary and then had a tough general, I thought this would be it for him. I thought he'd win. But that he'd say, I'm not interested in knocking on doors, so I'm just going to go ahead and let this be my swan song. But yeah, that's when you're grooming some kind of successor. But I really thought out of the chute that McMurtry was going to be able to make some waves. The problem there is you talk about policy, and a lot of people really didn't like it. They wanted somebody more moderate to challenge him, more the Chamber of Commerce Republican.
Right.
And not what they got with McMurtry. They got somebody whose his total policy platform, best I can tell, is that he's going to do what Donald Trump wants him to do. They're
trying to out-Trump each other. Yeah. And then they're trying to out who's least of a racist each other. I mean, that race has turned so wackadoo crazy. It's almost a go-to for me to have comic relief.
Yeah.
It's like a bad sitcom. It really is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think it'll be interesting, but I think that it won't be that interesting, unfortunately. At least we'll finally have a Democratic candidate from Northern Kentucky. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
I never thought that would have to be something to get excited about, but that might help when the time comes for the push there towards the end. And a lot of these votes around the pandemic and the like are going to be a lot more no votes from Thomas Massey. And those things they're not helping him right now. They often help him with the libertarians, but I think this pandemic, is different. And
I think especially suburban white moms, suburban soccer moms are going to play one of the biggest roles they've ever played in an election this year. And that hurts him because those who would normally have voted Republican are now looking at children. They're now looking at, like you said, who's getting the relief from these things and who is he denying relief from these things. And when you're denying families any kind of relief, I think that dings against him.
Well, and you already see the campaign kind of gearing up with their lots more pictures of Thomas Massey's family than I've ever seen before.
Oh, I know.
He has a family?
I'm not going to lie though.
He has a family?
Oh, yeah.
My favorite is the video of him chopping pre-split wood.
Oh, I know. As a farmer, I'm just like, I
It's
always
stunt
say
wood.
farmer in quotes when I talk about him.
I mean, that's the best thing I've ever seen. It flashes him holding a gun. Then it flashes him hauling an axe over his shoulder and chopping wood. But you look at the wood and you're like, wait a minute, that's already been hit before. It's like split already.
Wow.
It's so testosterone infused. It's ridiculous. And then it ends with this wonderful thing of him and his family. And you're like, what the hell? Who put this together?
At least he wasn't shirtless on a horse.
Ah, and on that visual cue. Thanks for that one, Amy.
You're welcome.
I know I've got the bourbon around here somewhere.
Come on over after this,
It's
Roberto.
after 5. It's time to break out the wine.
Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate you being on and dooming us to another term with the turtle, with Yertle the turtle. So we're going to blame it all on you.
Yeah.
It's
Ryan predicted it.
Yeah, he made it happen.
All right.
Thanks, John. This is really fun.
You have a good one. Take care. Appreciate you being on.
Absolutely.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
And that's going to wrap it up for Left in Kentucky this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If there's somebody you'd like to see on our show, some topic you'd like to see us cover, please reach out to us. You can find us on Facebook, Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4, and we'd love to hear from you. Make sure you spread the word of the podcast and share it with your friends. Share it with your enemies, for that fact. It's much more fun that way. And we
Tell them they can do left recon.
there you go. So share it out there. Stay in touch with us, and we will. Maybe we'll be back next week. Maybe we won't. We're going to keep you guessing.
And I realized that Ryan, I had his political science class, and he gave me an A.
Oh, really?
How
Did he
crazy is
give
that?
you an A, or did you earn an A?
He gave me an A. I think I earned it. Pretty
Okay.
sure I did.
I'm not going down that road.
Hard work, dedication.
Family show again. Family show. All right. So that's going to wrap it up for this week. Everybody, have a good week. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. Until next time, this is Roberto Henriquez.
Amy Ferguson.
And Dickerson.
Goodbye.
See ya.
Left in Kentucky, the podcast of Indivisible Northern Kentucky.